Welcome to Engaging Culture, a podcast presented by Bridgeway Christian Church. I'm Brian Kiley. Today, Pastor Lance and I are joined by JT and Janelle Thomas to talk about pornography and sexual wholeness. We'll talk about what sexual addiction is and what it isn't. We'll talk about resources we have available at Bridgeway and in other places to aid in recovery and to aid in sexual wholeness. And we'll talk about how the church can be a safe place for men and women seeking healing. All of that and more on this episode of Engaging Culture. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Engaging Culture podcast. Brian Kiley with you, as always, joined by Pastor Lance Hahn.
I am right here. Here I am. I'm excited. This is an exciting podcast.
Yes, it is.
Because we get JT and Janelle Thomas.
We get JT and Janelle Thomas
I'm loving
with
this.
us. JT and Janelle, hello. I'm going to say hi to both of you, and you can decide who's going to say hi first.
Hello. Oh.
Nailed it. All right. Got it. So JT and Janelle, the two of you have been at Bridgeway for a while.
Almost 13 years.
Since Jesus walked the earth.
13 years. And Janelle, your parents attend here?
They do.
Your mother teases me often on Sunday mornings about various things, which I'm sure makes Lance happy.
Yes, I love teasing Brian.
But yes. So Marge, your mother, who is wonderful, is quite proficient in that. So
yeah, they're super involved.
Yes,
too.
they are very.
Yeah,
they're
this whole
very
family, I don't know, very involved.
Yes, the Thomas Durden crew is forced to be reckoned with.
And I just
Sunday
saw
mornings.
a baby Thomas get baptized.
Olivia,
Yes.
she's our middle.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
she's a smaller Thomas.
She is a smaller Thomas.
Than the
Non-adult
adult Thomas
Yes,
is
not
here.
the smallest.
Right.
Yeah,
But she is smaller.
13-year-old
Yeah.
version.
Yes,
There
I
you
just
go.
got to see her get baptized up at Hume Lake Camp. It was awesome.
Hey, how about that? That is pretty awesome. So the two of you have been involved in a lot of different ministry here at Bridgeway, but in particular, you have worked with men and women in the area of sexual wholeness, healing, recovery, those sorts of things. Can maybe, JT, we'll start with you, talk about the ministry that you lead, and then Janelle will talk about what you lead, and then we'll get into your story, and we'll start talking about some of the different issues surrounding kind of pornography, sexual wholeness, all of that. So JT, tell us about what it is that you do.
Sure. So a number of years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, Steve Ernst, who was our men's ministry coordinator, great guy, he was always looking for good content to bring to the men. And I like to support that. I went to Forge, and then all of a sudden there was a Conquer series that we went through. At that time, it was 5 weeks and very fast, kind of like fire hose of information, just a lot to take in. Hour video and an hour discussion questions.
And Conquer is, for those who don't know.
Conquer is, it's a program to lead you from sexual addiction to sexual wholeness and understand how pornography and other things just devastate the relationship between husbands and wives and just Christians in the world and the people that they're trying to minister to and be connected to.
Great. So we started with Conquer, and then where did it kind of go from there?
So then that Conquer broke into 10 weeks to kind of slow it down and be a little better speed-wise. But then it also, they realized 10 weeks is great, but it doesn't lead to long-term transformations. So then they went to kind of a 10-month deal, which is 7 pillars, and it takes each concept and breaks it down, and you kind of spend about a month on it, going through different parts of it. So it's just not so fast, and then there's just real connection between the guys that go through it, so that they can break that isolation. A key component to it, is to do that. And so 10 weeks is a great start, and a lot of times those groups go right into seven pillars.
Right. Okay. So you're leading groups that start with this sort of 10 weeks, then go into a longer term commitment for guys just to be in an environment where they can pursue.
Because it's just you can't not meet weekly. It's just one of the facets to recovery.
Right. And we get a lot of great feedback on all that stuff.
Yes.
Just wanted to point that out.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And then Janelle, the ministry you lead is a little more recent in its start, if I'm not mistaken, at least here at Bridgeway. Talk a little bit about what it is that you do.
Sure. So I lead a study called Betrayal and Beyond. It's for wives or women in relationships with men who struggle with sexual integrity. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is helping them to understand what the addiction is, what it isn't. There's a lot of misunderstanding. Understanding what their role is, what their role isn't in that recovery or in the relationship. A lot of women blame themselves. A lot of men blame women because that's a way of coping with it. So it's bringing a lot of truth into that. Looking at boundaries, looking at our own health and how we can grow, how God wants to help us grow and heal, and then works through things like grief and forgiveness, and then how to move forward. And we have women whose husbands are in recovery, which is great, and we have women whose husbands have left. We have women whose husbands have left years ago, and they're still kind of just carrying around, dragging that pain around with them. So it's a way for them to kind of process through the betrayal.
Wow.
And we just finished our second group, and we'll be starting a third in the fall.
Wow. That's great.
One of the things, let me just say right off the bat, one of the things that I think, I was just talking with Susie about this the other day, that is so powerful about what this couple brings to the table is that historically there has always been kind of a one-size-fits-all with, hey, there's pornography out there, it's evil, don't do it, move on.
Right.
And what you guys have brought to the table, and I think that newer ministries like Pure Desire and stuff like that, I think there's this healthier approach of saying, can we create understanding?
Right.
Yeah.
What you guys bring in terms of bringing conversation and nuance and a bunch of different things, just so that there's an understanding of underlying root causes, stuff like that. I think that is so powerful.
Yep.
And why I'm so proud of what they do.
Yep. Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I mean, the hey, just stop it. Obviously, there's an old Mad TV sketch where I think Bob Newhart plays a psychologist.
It's a great video.
Right? And it's like,
stop it.
Somebody comes in with like these problems, and his advice to her is stop it. Stop it. And so often, we're not that overt about it, but that's sort of how we approach a wide range of challenges, not just this one. But I think you're right, Lance. That level of understanding, getting behind, okay, what's really going on here, that's a key component to bringing healing to relationships, bringing healing to individuals. So now I know that your interest in this ministry begins sort of with your own personal story, and we're going to get into a lot of the kind of the why behind some of these various challenges, and then talk about resourcing and how we can help and how people can seek healing that need it. But I know that the two of you wanted to start with just sharing a little bit of your story. So would love to kind of start with that. Maybe JT, you can start, and then Janelle, we'll just sort of go from there.
Yeah. So I young kid, only child, kind of two different childhoods, but the first part was really good. Just everything was good. Christian parents, going to church, go to church camp, accept Jesus as my Lord and personal Savior, and just that was awesome. I think camp is like a little taste of heaven on earth.
Amen.
Yeah, and so that was all good. And then about a year later or so, I grew up in a rural area, and there was just always a fort or a place that kids had, and no one really checked parentally, and so there's magazines there and everything. So I was exposed to it probably about age 11, and there just wasn't a lot of information about the dangers of it. And what I was really messing with is, basically fire. And then got hit with kind of some childhood trauma. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and I just prayed my heart out, put everything into it. Lord, don't let this happen. All that kind of stuff, and then parents split and just kind of shuffled back and forth. And so that was just, and then a lot of isolation. Some of that's just from the only child part. And my personality wasn't to go seek out answers and talk to my pastor and ask my dad, all this stuff. So just kind of went into myself with the isolation, and and then had this not really understanding of what I was messing with. And so it just became this way to cope with at that time, that kind of trauma, and then just from there on, all different kinds of, things that cause stress and anxiety, and it was just a way to cope, a way to cope and get through life the best I knew without getting a lot of, healthy input and information. And after the divorce, we stopped going to church, so, relationships with anybody that I would talk to about it, that didn't happen, and so it just kind of was this perfect cycle of just really going. I was like, this will, I'll take it with me to my grave, and that's just, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't, no one's talking about it, and so I just got locked up in it.
Yeah.
And then thought, well, maybe when I get married, I'll meet somebody, and when I get married, this can kind of go away. And
Right.
that kind of thing. But there was as I was a Christian, I knew something that wasn't right, and so I had kind of the binge purge cycle, which would be binge would have it around for a while and access to it, and then like I don't want to do this. I don't think this is honoring to myself or to the Lord, so I get rid of it, and until the stresses and things would build up, and that the hooks were in my mind and my heart with it, and so I just couldn't get full on relief from it, and so that's kind of brings us up to where we met. But that's how it kind of gets locked in, and you don't realize it's slowly working to an addiction, and it's not a switch that you can just go, no, I don't want to do this. I'll switch it off and walk away from it. Right. It's it just slowly becomes this coping mechanism for this trauma in a lot of cases for men.
Well, and like you said, you have the binge purge cycle where maybe for a little while you kind of say, okay, willpower, whatever, this isn't going to be part of my life anymore. And that just, as we know now, that just doesn't work. That's not sufficient to address sort of some of the root issues.
Yeah, because it doesn't do anything about the pain, which is a lot of times what took you there, and it'll take you back there.
Right. So then talk to us then about the process of, first of all, identifying what you were going through as an addiction, and then the process of recovery. How did that start, and what did that look like?
Well, the best thing that came out of the Conquer series was like the first night or the second night, they just tell you that this is not a moral issue. Like if we could all morally just choose, we would. We love the Lord. That's our first choice. Right. And initially, exposure to it, you have some of that choice for a little while. But as it grows stronger and it becomes a coping mechanism, you lose that. So they're saying it's not a moral issue, it's a pain issue. So Conquer was like, let's look at what your pain is, what your trauma is. And so once you realize what you're dealing with and you start to deal with it as a pain issue, you go, okay, I have to express what my pain was, and I have to, and then you also realize, like, the world's not perfect, it's a fallen world, but I'm a little bit of an innocent bystander as far as my parents getting divorced and stuff like that. I didn't control that. There's trauma that we don't control. So you realize, okay, I didn't choose this. I didn't even do this to myself. So I really feel like it's kind of unfairly, in my life. I want to get rid of it even more. And so I'm even more focused on, I didn't want this in the first place. And really, how do I get rid of it long-term forever? And most of us are like, well, if I have pain, it doesn't sound like a good thing not to heal from it. So you're interested in healing, and it just starts to break. Will help you with your understanding of what you're dealing with and how to address it. Whereas before you're just kind of lost and you're like, I don't know. I can purge for a while, but then the binge always comes back too.
Right. Janelle, let's kind of get your perspective on some of this. Obviously, just walking alongside JT, both in understanding what it is he was going through and then sort of your own thought process through it, and then how you've sought both to understand maybe what he was going through and then how maybe the two of you have worked together to kind of help bring healing.
Sure. So when I met JT, he was newly kind of following the Lord again, and this topic came up as we were dating. And so I asked him, is this an issue for you? And he said, no. Which, when I discovered that it was, that I think felt like the biggest betrayal, because I was like, I checked this off. Like when things in our marriage started getting really hard, I never thought that it could be this, because he had always been really honest with me. And so I was really surprised that he had lied. Looking back now, I think he was probably in a purge cycle, and so he was probably like, no, this isn't an issue for me. And then of course it comes back. And I think a binge purge cycle can be one day the next day, or it can be 6 months. Right. So it's it messes with your head a little bit of, have I really mastered this, or is it just going to come back? When we got married, or after we had been married for a while, I think that JT didn't realize how it affected our marriage. I think a lot of men don't. They go to a lot of effort to hide it, to try to appear normal, to
Control it, minimize it.
Minimize it, all those things. And they don't realize that it really changes who they are as a person and how they treat people. And there was a lot of his pain that was coming out in our marriage, and I didn't know how to fix that. So, I was praying, asking God for answers. Do we need counseling? What do we need to do? Spent a lot of time kind of sifting through his criticism and asking God, what of this is true? This doesn't all feel like it's accurate. And it wasn't really until, I got to a point where I just kind of stopped praying. Mm-hmm. I just was like, God, I've used all the words, I've asked, I've said all the things. Yeah. Like, I'm just kind of getting to this place where I'm just going to say, maybe I'm just not, a good marriage, a really happy marriage isn't promised to me. And we're just this is how marriage is going to be. It's just going to be hard. And so I kind of stopped praying. And then one day on my way home from Target, a song came on the radio, How He Loves by David Crowder. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it was like God told me, you hear this song and you feel how much God loves you. JT doesn't feel that. He does not feel loved by God. And I started crying because I was like, man, since I was the littlest girl, that was just something I was convinced of, that God loved me. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like to go through life not having that as sort of like your base foundation in life. And so that was how God told me how to pray for him. And I really just started praying that he would be able to know how much God loved him. And this was before I knew. Mm-hmm. And then we had D-Day, Discovery Day. And I won't go into
equally as violent.
Yes, but equal as promising.
Yeah, amen.
God loves us too much to leave us where we're at, right?
Right.
We know that.
And I think he wanted to be found out because I think he was like desperate to get out. And it was kind of like, well, if I can't do this on my own, then maybe if my wife finds out,
there was a scary feeling where I thought my family would be better without me around to keep hurting them. Mm-hmm. And that was like, whoa, that's not what I want to feel.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So discovery happens. And this is I don't want to get too sidetracked in this, but I would imagine this is something that maybe you do hear a bit, that there is this sense of, for those that are struggling, that there is this sort of weird sense in which they're afraid to be found out, but they sort of want to be found out too, because they almost feel like that's what's going to be necessary to kind of catalyze some change. Well,
and what's weird is that I take this huge blow, so I'm like on the floor, like, what is happening? Mm-hmm. And he's feeling this weight lifted because the secret that he's carried around for all this time is out in the open. And when scripture says that you bring things from the dark into the light, like, seriously, that happened that day in front of my eyes. He was instantly a different person. Wow. And so that gave me hope. Yeah. He's like, do you want me to leave? And I'm like, no, I don't want to explain to my kids why you're leaving. Probably that was my initial. But I was also like, something's happening here. Something's happening here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And as a married person, I've been going through this all by myself. And then one of the things that kind of brought it to was I had trauma in my life as a child, and I totally turned and ran and was just angry with God, and then worked my way back to that. And then we lost my mom in a car accident, tragically. And it was like, oh, okay, so are you going to do the same thing that you did before and just run away from God and be mad? And I'm like, no, I know more now about mature faith and understanding and his plan and all that. So that kind of led to this, it's got to change, and coping mechanism, and so discovery. And it was a weight lifted, because Satan tells you the lie that your wife only loves you because she doesn't know the real you, but as soon as she finds out, she's gone. And I believe that, but this was going to it's going to be like, okay, well, we'll see now. I hope not. I really do. I think she's very strong. That's one of the things that attracted me to her, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and that's probably something that scares a lot of. I say men, but I know that both men and women struggle with this stuff. But I think that's something that probably scares a lot of married people to say, well, if my spouse finds out, then it's.
Well, there is a risk. I mean, we
lost.
started the conversation you were mentioning in your women's group. There's women that left and women that,
Sure.
and so, that is a very real danger.
Yeah. So discovery happens. There's pain, there's all these, I mean, I can only imagine extremely complex emotions, but then it's from there, it's like, okay, everything's out, so now some healing can begin. Is that
Well,
is that
let me caution you.
Yeah.
Everything being out, just because I know people are listening, and there's people that may be convicted that they need to go and confess this. Be very careful.
Yeah.
We were in counseling at the time, and so gratefully we had a counseling appointment the next day. We could sit down with our counselor and just sort of say, this is what happened in the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
This is, and so his disclosure to me of what exactly we were dealing with happened with that guidance and support. Really important, because if a husband, for example, decides he's ready to tell, and then he feels like, well, I'm gonna tell him all. I'm gonna tell him, every website, every street, every name, everything. Then you have this wife who now has all these triggers and has all this trauma that now she has to work through. So it
needs to be guided.
There needs to be honesty, but it also needs to be carefully done. So not necessarily the first step.
Well, the other
wise.
challenge is that if somebody is ready to let it all go, they're going to see the trauma on the other person, and it's going to hijack what they thought was going to happen in their head, and they just shut down. Then all of a sudden you go, wait, I thought I knew it all. You lied to me. I found out more later. And you know what I'm saying? And then now the betrayal keeps happening because you're still a liar. You never really told me everything. And then the person doesn't want to go, hey, can you crush me today and a little bit every day?
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So they keep asking for more information when they do not need all that information
So
up front.
we've learned to say things like, do I know everything that I need to know? Like, do I need to go get an STD test? Do I need to, are there people that are involved in this that I need to know about? Some of those kind of questions. Are there financial implications to this? Are we, have you spent a lot of money on this that I don't know about?
Yep.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are important to know, but details of things, no.
But that kind of cool head that you're talking about from right now, that's why a counselor is so helpful.
Right.
Because they're pulled out of the emotions and they're like, hey, there actually are there's an order that we might need to know some things. We have some immediate questions we need to answer. But as we're navigating through this trauma, there might be a better way to do it.
Right. And like you said, somebody with a little bit of emotional distance and frankly probably some experience with guiding others through these sorts of, they can sort of help with okay, what do we really need to know?
Right.
What's going to be helpful? What's not? And there is a complexity to this that we ignore at our peril, I would assume.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit more generally about the issues in play here, and we can certainly integrate more of your story in that because we hear about this stuff all the time, but at the same time, it's challenging. How do you talk about this in the church context in a way that can actually be helpful? How do we help people in an age where, I mean, it's almost cliche to say it, but really is true. Like, I mean, I had to work really hard if I wanted to find something inappropriate when I was a teenager. Whereas now, I mean, I'm just like, praise the Lord, I'm not a teenager in 2019, right? I mean, it's everywhere. How prevalent is sexual addiction in our society today? Because I think that a big reason why people are there are many reasons why people are hesitant to confess, people are hesitant to seek help. But I do think one of them is that people think, oh, well, certainly in church, I'm the only one. And people, other people aren't doing this and they're going to think I'm this, that, and the other thing. But that's really not true. The statistics tell a very different story, right? I mean, how prevalent is this in your own experience and maybe statistics you've seen?
About 7 out of 10 Christian men struggle with this, and we're getting numbers of about 30% of women. I don't know if that's distinction between the whole population.
Yeah, I think the statistics for women are still pretty new.
Yeah.
We're still, that's a brand new thing that we're finally sort of paying attention to, is how many women are getting sucked into this. But it's really common among Christian men.
Yeah. But it'd be very common, like you said. And I think that's the important thing that I think it needs to get out there so that people know, okay, you're not the only one. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. Cut me off. When I read that, so after Discovery, I was like, I got to know what I'm dealing with. So I think I sat down and read Every Man's Battle in like a day, and wanted to understand what I was fighting. And when I saw that the statistics were that high, I was like, I can't. Like, I would go into church on Sunday and I would look around during worship and I would be like, 7 out of every 10 guys sitting around me in church right now are struggling with this.
Yep.
And I knew what it was doing to him and what it was doing to our family. And I was like, God, this is not okay.
Yeah.
This is not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another idea is that I would estimate that. So you don't always have this conversation with all of your friends.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, dude, so how's your porn addiction? You all right there?
Yeah.
But I would say out of all the men that in my life that I've talked to that happen to this subject comes up, I have met 4 that don't struggle in my entire life.
Yeah.
So, and then if you talk about statistics where they interview pastors, pastors are 78%.
Yeah.
Right,
So
higher.
They're higher than the normal.
Yeah.
And that's the ones being honest. Right. So, because for pastors, there's a whole different level of, you don't get to just go join a group. You don't get to do all those things. That's not how it works.
Right.
The risks are higher.
The risks are higher.
Yeah.
So
No.
once again, the prevalence, I'm just telling you that just as a dude, and I meet a lot of people because I know thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And I've met 4.
Right. Right. And it's not, like you said, not something you talk about with every single person.
No.
But you're right. Yeah. Just that those would say it is not a temptation, it's not a struggle. And I'll just be honest about my own thing. Like, it's not a big struggle for me in the sense that, like, I don't, like, people can go look at my web history and they're not going to, they're going to see I spend too much time on ESPN. But that's, that's like, wow.
That's actually why we're here today.
Yeah, I'm pretty honest about that. But here's the thing, like, I remember I was in like an accountability relationship with a guy who, like, that was one of the things he wanted me to ask him about because he really struggled with. And I remember he asked me the question. He's like, man, how do you just get so you don't think about it? And I said, bro, it has been years since this has been an issue for me. I think about it every day. I think about, like, even today, like, times when I'm at a computer by myself, I'm up early in the morning or I'm up late at night. I think about it as a possibility every single day. So I think even for those who I would say it is not really a struggle for me in the sense that I'm not acting out, just to know it's there. The thought of, oh, hey, I could go look at something on the internet and no one would know. I think about it constantly.
Yep.
So I think for us all just to be aware that, hey, none of us are like, oh, hey, that's not a struggle at all.
Well, there's a reason why it was called Every Man's Battle.
Right. Not some guy's battle. Right.
Not somebody's
It wasn't like 7 out of 10 men's battle.
Yeah.
A few guys battle.
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about, one thing I want to make sure we get out there is there are a lot of misperceptions and misunderstandings when it comes to pornography addiction, sexual addiction, etc. What is sexual addiction, and then what is it not? What do we need to understand and make sure we're clear on in terms of definitions here?
Well, I think if you think about, what do you think of with addiction, say with a substance abuse problem? It's a lot of the same stuff. It's usually rooted in pain. It's a way to cope with things in life that you're not dealing with, to escape from things.
Yeah.
You use it and it makes you feel better for a short time. You have a dopamine release or whatever.
Right.
But you need more. You develop a dependence on it. You can't give it up. You want to stop, but you can't.
Yeah.
You start isolating yourself. You maybe are in denial. I can stop whenever I want. This isn't a big deal. This isn't hurting anybody. And you stop, and you can't really see how it's affecting you, how it's changing you, or how it's affecting other people around you. So for us, our experience is sexual addiction did all of that for us.
Yeah. JT, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's just if you're using it to cope with life, struggles, trials, pain, anxiety, that's not how God intended it to be used, right? It's a part of the relationship between a husband and wife that should reflect healthiness of all the rest of the relationship, and it should be a celebration, and there's those reasons that it should be, but it's imbalance. It's not used to cope with the stresses of life.
Right. Janelle, I want to ask from the spouse perspective, how does understanding this as an addiction help? Because I've talked to guys who, just even as they've processed it with their own wives, saying that on somewhat there's tons of pain involved and the emotions are very complicated, and I recognize that. But there's a shift that happens, at least from what I've been told, when you think of it as this is just some selfish, dumb thing my husband does. Mm-hmm. And instead start thinking about it as an addiction. How does that affect the way that you approach it and in terms of just the way that you process it as the spouse? If at all. Maybe it doesn't affect it.
It was huge. It was huge for me. I think when I realized, when JT shared with me how this started, that made a big difference for me. Because this wasn't like I was married to you and you weren't enough for me. Yeah. And so I went elsewhere. Which is what I think a lot of people think, that's how this addiction starts. Yeah. For a lot of men, and I would say more and more now that we have the wonderful availability of smartphones, early access to this, early exposure to this is such a huge factor. So for me, when I was tempted to feel really angry and furious and unforgiving, and other women have said this too, I didn't look at JT as the 40-something-year-old guy who was choosing to act out and knowing that it would hurt me. I thought of him as the 11-year-old boy who was exposed to this when his brain wasn't even prepared to say, stop, this is bad, don't do this. What we know now about brain function and how all of this stuff happens, you look at it and you go, wow, it really is almost impossible once you're hooked on it, the chemistry in your brain. And so, I really, that was really helpful for me to develop empathy for why he was where he was. And to also realize, like when I first found out, I was like, all right, you've confessed, we're done. This is not happening anymore. It's not allowed in my house. We're done. Right. And I didn't understand the complexity of how he got there and the complexity of what it would take to get out. Yeah. And so when I started to understand that, it was like, okay, I'm going to trust. We're going to keep moving in the right direction, and we're going to get there. And he was like fierce about it. So that made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and what amazing strength on your part to be willing to do the work to understand. I mean, because that could not have been easy for you to do. But
especially when you're mad. I don't want to research something for somebody that I'm mad at. Forget that.
I want to build empathy for you.
Just say, this is your own stinking problem, man. Go solve it. That's not really a thing, though.
Well, and I honestly, I was like, this is your problem. Like, sure. Some people are really inclined to codependency. I'm really inclined not to codependency.
That's not a struggle for you?
So, I have women that are like, I'm constantly checking his phone. I go through all of the mail. I follow him everywhere. I do all these things. Whatever. I'm like, ain't nobody got time for that. I got 3 kids I got to raise. And some of that was he really took responsibility for his recovery. Immediately was like, this is on me. But yeah, he was really fierce about it. And so that allowed me to do that.
I think when she got the understanding that if there was a way I could have avoided this and not had the childhood trauma and the early exposure, sign me up. That's what I would have chosen.
That would have been awesome.
That's what I would have first, and not bring this into our marriage and not hurt you with this. Right. That's what but I didn't do that. I couldn't do that. And I think it made there's just something that clicks of like, oh, you didn't really want this? Like this, you didn't go seeking this out. You didn't ever think this was a solution to make you a better person, Christian, husband, father. It happened to you, and that really helped.
Yeah, can I transition on
Please,
something real quick? So for everyone listening, we're talking about JT and Janelle's unique situation. There are a variety of reasons why people engage in pornography, and the story that we're telling right now is one of the key stories, but it's not everybody's story. And so let me just highlight out, as I was sitting down and preparing for this podcast, I wrote down 8 reasons about why some people, and once again, pornography addiction is a possibility for anyone that is visually sexually stimulated. That means it can be women.
Yes.
Right? It's just whoever that is a thing for, but traditionally men are visually stimulated more than women are, so it tends to be a male-dominated problem. But once again, anybody that has a visual stimulation key to themselves and their sexuality may well struggle with this. All right. Having said that, so here's 8 reasons, and they're not in any particular order. Okay, so number 1, self-soothing. That is numbing from pain, exhaustion, depression, anxiety, stress, disappointment, or hurt. Now, that is going to likely be what we've been talking about the entire time here, right? So it is a coping mechanism. The second one is feeling better. So recently, in one of our podcasts, we were talking with a gentleman about addiction to drugs. And he was explaining that one of the challenges with drugs is that you can feel better than you do right now. Whether or not you have a current wound, you can feel better. So for a lot of the reasons why people have caffeine in the morning, you don't have to have caffeine to go, but you know that you can feel better than you do right now, and you may well be able to do something better that day. So that is an attraction to it. Number 3 is simply the sexual attraction element when you like the feeling of sexual stimuli. Now, this is where we tend to put it into the sin category, where you go, no, you just opt to wanting to do something that just is sexually interesting to you. Okay, that is another category. Number 4 is loneliness and rejection. That's when feeling no connection to women, or if it's a woman, towards men. Some seek it through online. Now, this will tend to lead to real-life connections, whether it's through cam connections where people are really... If it's truly a loneliness issue, just the visuals aren't enough. They push forward and forward and forward into, I need a person and I'm willing to pay them for it. That's where you start to see a lot of the things where it gets into real-life activity. Number 5 is boredom. It is the most interesting thing to do. So you think about college dudes bored out of their mind, and it's like, I can watch ESPN, but there's nothing on. You know what? The most interesting thing I could probably do right now is probably watch porn. So boredom is a factor. Number 6 is spiritual warfare. That is, if you feel like you're filled up and healthy in every other area and it's still coming and getting you, sometimes it's just flat out the enemy's just going to wreck you, right? Like you've done all the work and everything else and, okay, that's a problem. And then number 7 is combating a lack of sexual fulfillment. So men are on a 2 to 4 day cycle as far as craving sex. So the standard dude. And so if there's no outlet, they solve it by masturbation, or they solve it through pornography, things like that. And that is it. Once again, I'll get into this definition. One of my favorite definitions of sin ever is trying to meet a legitimate need by illegitimate means. Right? So you go, okay, well, there's a craving. It's not always a need. It's a craving. So just like our stomachs get hungry and we have hunger pangs, they're actually self-created. You create your own alarms in your body. So it's going, dude, you are super hungry. Now, whether you are or you aren't, you feel that and you want to stop that feeling, right? And then the last one, number 8, is what we talked about as well, is addiction. They simply are involved in it because they don't know how not to be. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to clarify that while we're talking about all that you'll go, oh, so it must be, once I found out about him, I'm going to find out he has trauma pain. You're like, well, let's say he doesn't. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You don't realize there's 7 other options on this list. And this is obviously a sampling. This is just me sitting down and writing out a list. There's a bunch more than that.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's important to recognize, I mean, if we're going to talk about the church being an environment of healing, if we're going to talk about a Conquer group, a Pure Desire group, a Betrayal and Beyond group being a place of healing, you have to recognize the complexity of not only the issues in play, but also how did we get here? Because we didn't all get here on the same path, right? There's a variety.
Well,
of
and the
ways.
complexity, you can tell. Some of those need to be held accountable. Some of those need to be healed. Some of those need to be, you know what I mean? Like your responses to the different pieces of it. And even someone like JT, who has had trauma in his past, he may have a sufficient level of healing, but then also struggle with some of the other pieces of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, yeah, you're right. I did get enough healing to not, but I still have a longing.
Yeah.
Or, now I'm in the addiction cycle. So once again, it's just not as easy as we assume.
One of those that number 2, feeling better, could maybe apply to, and I think this is one that could be a big one. Even so, if you did have Christian parents, but they talk about like overly rigid home structure where it's about perfection and performance, and it's not so much about relationship and understanding.
Yes.
Yeah.
That can drive, this to be a problem.
It
as
will
well.
almost always drive a secret life.
Yeah.
Oh,
Any high performance or perfectionist environment, because human beings can't live in that environment, they have to go underground.
Right.
And so almost always that's what's going to happen. That's one of my big reasons why I can't stand legalistic environments in churches, because everyone's still doing it. It's just not being acknowledged. So it's
Right.
all underground.
Yeah, especially the people talking about it the most. Usually the most
Yes.
legalistic people in leadership
Are
usually
struggling.
have something going on, and
Yeah.
it's some sort of
For sure.
Anyway, we don't need to get into that. But JT, what you just said a moment ago brings me to the next thing I really wanted to talk about is you guys gave us some really interesting stuff to read in preparation for this episode about shame and the role of shame in sexual wholeness and all of that. Can you talk to us a little bit? Let's first of all just start with the issue itself. Talk about the role of shame in these types of issues.
I might not have the complete perfect definition of shame, but from my understanding of going through this is shame is like a character flaw that can never be fixed. It's like you're damaged beyond repair. Guilt and remorse and sorrow, those are all feelings that we should look at and be motivated to bring about change and repentance. But in the Conquer series, they talk about guilt is like you're playing football and you stepped out of bounds where you could have went further if you hadn't done that. But shame is like you're never going to get in the end zone ever, because it's just not in what you can do, and it's not over. You can't overcome it. And so I feel like guilt is something we can deal with, and like I said, sorrow and remorse and regret. But from what I've studied, just from going through it, is like shame is like insurmountable and that you can't overcome. Now, we can, and God can heal us from that. And so, but it's just. Unfortunately, I think that the shame factor is the number one strategy that Satan uses to just keep us from talking about it, being open and honest in our deepest connected relationships, and it just makes the isolation just crazy powerful.
Yeah, and when we're in that place of shame, kind of what you alluded to, we feel like this is all I'm ever going to be, and there's no hope for me to get better. And then one of the articles you sent us from Covenant Eyes said that when we feel terrible about who we are, we pursue behaviors that provide irrefutable evidence that we are unwanted. And that to me is, that is shame and its effects right there, right? Janelle, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that shame is how the enemy attacks our identity.
Yeah.
He starts to tell us who we are.
Yeah.
Instead of this being about I made a mistake or I'm doing something I don't want to do anymore. I want to change. It's this is who you are.
Yeah.
And so when you think that that's who you are, you think I have to hide this. And when you hide it, then the enemy convinces you that if anyone knew, they would reject you.
Yeah.
And so it perpetuates the hiding, which means you're not getting support. You're not all the things that help you change, you're cutting yourself off from because of the shame.
Yeah. So shame starts in a bad place and it takes you obviously to a worse one because it isolates you.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I had all these thoughts, and Janelle just said them all perfectly.
Said them all.
They were pretty awesome.
Does that mean you'll be quiet now?
No. He'll have more thoughts.
When has that ever happened, Miss Janelle?
Welcome to my world.
Yes. But so shame is it's such a big deal. And I'm guessing on some level, by the time somebody takes the step of signing up to be a part of a group that's going to help them get whole, like on some level, they've taken a step out of shame a little bit. So the unfortunate reality is when somebody's really in the clutches of shame, they're not even going to engage with what kind of you all offer or similar type programs. But I just want to ask, how have you seen others maybe help other people work through these feelings of shame to kind of bring them to a place of hope? Because to me, that seems like a critical component of any sort of healing from just about any hang up, let alone this one.
Yeah. You've dealt a lot more with guys who are just,
They're so a lot of times
overwhelmed by shame.
so ready that when somebody starts talking openly about it and without shame, but with conviction and hope and healing, they've been waiting for that. I was waiting for that for a long time, and then I vowed once I had answers, I would just keep telling people what they were.
Yeah. And
so, that leads us to today. But when I've shared, it's just like you don't have to stay where you're at. Right. And so they're like, okay, well, so how do I get out of there? And we talk about breaking the denial structures. So you've got to come to group and be in community. You were hurt probably in community. You're going to heal in community. Yep. It's a weekly deal. Sometimes you want to go to group, sometimes you don't. But most time afterwards, everybody's like, "Oh, I feel good." After I didn't want to come. I didn't want to drive here.
Like going to church.
Yeah. So, and then we have a crazy thing where a lot of groups have attrition. We have our groups get bigger after they start because guys they need connection, right? They're human, but our society doesn't say that that's an important need, but they start to realize it. They get some traction on some sobriety. They realize they can do it, and they start to heal from some pain. They realize they're not just an immoral person. That they start to understand all the nuances of addiction, and it just you start to break away all the supports for the addiction. And like for me, I realized, wait, I've healed from some of this pain. I don't need the self-soothing. I don't need I don't need what's not good for me. I can actually, one part of it is sitting in the pain and realizing, actually, am strong enough with the Lord to do this now and to just, let's do this. Let's heal. Let's have the real pain, feel it, not numb it, not, have a Band-Aid for it, but let's take it in and give it to the Lord. Like, I never understood that, but giving it to the Lord, I think, is when you're like, I'm in it. This does not feel good, and you're telling the Lord that, and you're just being honest with yourself, and you're not in denial. Guys just give testimonies every week of where they're at, and relapse is a part of it. Sometimes it's we're there to catch them on the relapse part, and remind them you didn't go all the way back to square one. You just had a small relapse. You've still learned and grown all the way to what got you here now, but learn from the relapse. And there's a ton of learning that happens because they don't feel good about it, so they want to understand what was it this time, and hopefully they get fewer relapses further down the road. And it's just once they have hope, right? It's like the Lord is doing a work in me. They start to believe that, and they start to believe that their mind can really be renewed. Yeah. And once they have belief and they know that they've got guys on their side and they're not alone. And God shows up, right? Yeah. Every week He shows up.
Yeah, wow. You get out of the shame spiral, all of a sudden, all sorts of great possibilities are on the table. Right. And that obviously it happens in community. And to keep people out of the shame spiral in the case of relapse, to know that, okay, a relapse is not a reason for shame. Okay, let's talk about it. What happened? But this is not a shaming environment. I mean, that's huge. So then this is the question that is such a drag to ask as a Christian, as a pastor, as a person who works in a church, as a person who's addressed this in different ways, probably poorly in some environments. What are some ways that the church inadvertently, or even just Christians in general, inadvertently contribute to kind of the shame around these types of issues?
Okay, so I think the biggest one that we agreed on is that we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it at all. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I think people who are struggling, they kind of come to one of three conclusions, which is, this is too shameful to talk about it. It's so bad that the church won't even talk about it. Or this isn't a big deal. This isn't a big problem. It's not important enough to address. Or that that God doesn't have an answer for it. Mm-hmm. And so I think all of those things send the message that if the church won't talk about it, then I shouldn't talk about it.
It's not safe.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not safe. How could it be safe if we don't talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think another one is that a lot of times the church feels, and this holds true in a lot of controversial cultural things, the church really feels like it's important to make sure people understand this is a sin. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people know that it's a sin. And that doesn't mean they have the power to change or that they know what to do. And so a lot of times the church, and I'm saying sort of church, big C, Christian community, I spend time on Facebook just looking and seeing how people respond to articles published by Pure Desire or Covenant Eyes or any of these groups that are endeavoring to help people in addiction. And inevitably, you have this slew of well-intentioned Christians who will kind of go off and share all the Bible verses about why this is bad and how it's ruining the world and why we should get rid of it. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know how that helps somebody that's stuck in it,
Yeah, no one's really disputing that. No one's saying, hey, this is actually a good thing and what's the big deal, right? We don't need to be reminded that it's
outside
bad.
Of the church. You will for
outside
sure
of the church, yes.
See that.
Yeah, within the church.
Some inside of the church. But I think for a lot of men who get to the place where they're reading an article about it, it's usually like, I'm looking for help. I don't need somebody to kind of rail me with all the Bible verses about why, this is lust or this is adultery or that sort of thing.
I mean, at that point, I would assume it's more a matter of, okay, let's talk tools here. How do I, all right, like I get it. How do I take some steps forward here? And even something from another one of the articles that you sent us, I think the article was actually called "Shame Preaching," was how we talked about how it was really helpful. It talked about how, and man, this is broadly applicable once again, how we give the motive but not the means, the target without the tools. We provide a clear purpose but without an applicable plan. We leave people feeling more trapped than ever before. They walk away from our sermons motivated to change with a deep understanding of why they should, but nothing in them is actually changed. Their brain is still stuck in the same ingrained rut. Their way of doing life, medicating pain through temporary highs, remained unchanged. Only now, when they act out, the shame is deeper than ever.
Right.
Holy cow.
Yeah. I think that is... I think that was his experience for a long time in the church, where you bring it up, you talk about it, you even say... You need to repent. We need to pray for it. You include it in your examples of sins that people are struggling with, but there's what comes after that, Yeah.
That and once again, broadly applicable, the resourcing. We can all get together on a Sunday morning and have a great emotional experience and all of that, but if we're not resourced to take the incremental steps that need to be taken, the fruit of that is going to be limited, right? And I'd imagine that's what we see with this issue in particular all too often, right? Yeah. So what in general, you've talked about how, okay, we need to talk about it more and all of that. What are some ways we can address this issue in a way that reduces shame, promotes healing? And then I want to talk about resourcing a little bit, like what resources are available for those who would say, okay, I get it, this is a challenge and I need some help, where do I go? So let's start with how can we talk about it better in a healing, promoting, shame reducing sort of way?
I think one of the big things, we've already mentioned it, is acknowledge the complexities of it. Don't try to give
Right.
simple answers like, well, you just need to trust Jesus more, or you just need to stop looking at it, or things like that.
Educate people that it's a mostly, a lot of times it's a pain issue, not a moral issue. If everybody could just flip the switch to moral integrity, sexual wholeness for 100% of the time, they would do that.
Right. I think that's huge, by the way, because I think that's a big reason
that's a good
why
one.
we try to say, oh, well, it's just you make it a moral issue. It's totally you're completely removed from the real root causes, and it only creates an environment of shame and elitism and legalism. It's not good.
Yeah, moralism leads to judgment because you're trying to say, well, this is what you're doing is bad.
Right.
I think when you look at it as a pain issue, then hopefully as Christ followers, we go, how do I help you in your pain? How do I walk with you through that? What can I do to bring healing to you? When this happened, I called my best friend, and I was the best thing was that she could have said, well, he sucks. I mean, she could have.
Right, total
she could have
condemnation.
just been get out, kick him out. Kick him to the curb.
Yeah.
Instead, she just, if over and over again, she said, "We love him. We love him. We see God's identity in him. We see who God made him to be. We believe that God is going to work through this." And so the fact that I could confide in a friend and not fear that they were going to judge him, that was my biggest reservation in talking about this today, is that I don't want for people to think that my husband is immoral. I want my people to understand, or I want people to understand that he's an amazing person, an amazing creation of God who got stuck in something, and that by God's power and grace and mercy, he's been able to walk out of that, to fight his way out of that. And that that's what we need to do. We need to come along inside and say, how do I help you fight this?
Yeah.
How do I stick with you through this? And it's a roller coaster, but it's amazing. I mean, we have the opportunity to be in groups with people who are a mess, and we get to walk with them through that. And we see them on the very first day when they're literally like cussing. For me, that's my experience. These women come in and they're like, they're mad. They're mad and they're frustrated and they're hurt and everything. And at the end, they're talking about, how do I forgive? How do I let go of this anger? How do I move on? So, being willing to step into the mess and walk with people. I mean, isn't that how God always heals us?
Yeah.
It's always in community.
That's a Jesus style.
It's always in community.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. Now, in terms of resources, even just here at Bridgeway, so we're coming up, what month are we in? We're in July as we're recording here. We're coming up on the fall. We're going to have some environments available for people who want to get involved. And we've even got, we've got email addresses where people can even reach out to the two of you to get information or to learn about resources and all of that. Maybe just talk about Janelle, we'll start with you in terms of what's available for women, and then JT will talk what's available for men. So for those who say, hey, I want to get some help here, what do we have available for people?
So for wives right now, or girlfriends, we have a group called Betrayal and Beyond. We will be launching a group in the fall. It will be included in the women's studies. So if you're looking for it, you can sign up for it through that. But you can also email me, and I am happy to meet with you in advance of that or connect you with somebody so that you don't have to wait, because sometimes 2 months feels like an eternity.
What's that email address?
Right.
That email address is b&b@bridgewaychristian.org.
So BANDB
at bridgewaychristian.org.
Got it. Okay. And then JT, talk about your group a little bit.
Yeah. So we're the fall launch. We'll do the 10-week Conquer series, and that can, whatever size room we need, we can accommodate that many guys, and that's 10 weeks intensive understanding, but a lot can happen in that 10 weeks. So you break all the isolation, you get connected and stuff. And so that's kind of a big kickoff. But if there's guys that have been through Conquer, then there'll be some 7-pillar groups, which are longer in in time commitment. But and so just to remind guys, like a lot of times they're like, oh, this is a lot of work or whatever, and then we realize, wait, this is actually kind of what we're just supposed to be doing as Christians, meeting weekly for support and accountability and real connection. And then we're like, okay, so it's not a lot of work. It's just what we need to do, and it's healthy and
healthier
good.
rhythm.
It's discipleship, really is what it is.
And so then that changes things, and they actually talk about it as a lifestyle of connection and accountability to other Christians, and you get what Jesus wanted us to get from the church, which is the joy of having people with us go through the highs and the lows and not feeling alone and being strong, putting on the armor of God and being strong. So 10 weeks conquer, and then more of a 10-month to 11-month 7 pillars. Yeah. And then I have a email address also that is pure desire
at Bridgeway
Yeah. Bridgewaychristian.org, Bridgeway.church, they both work. But B&B for ladies, Pure Desire for men, both of those are available.
I will also say really quick, we don't have anything right now at Bridgeway, but there is a group for women who struggle with pornography addiction, a local one. So you can email me at that B&B address, and I'll put you in touch with that resource as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Now, last thing I want to talk about is something that I think, Janelle, you shared with me over email, is just the desire to, as we're having this conversation, just to honor the courage of those that you've seen kind of take the step of, okay, I want to get out of the shame spiral. I want to get out of this. I want to find some healing here. And you use that language of wanting to honor their courage. And I just wondered if maybe the two of you could talk a little bit about how have you seen God work in and through people who have had the courage to take some concrete steps towards healing?
For me, I've been in a number of groups. It's just you're seeing the power of Jesus to change people's lives in a similar way that he's transformed mine, to have real freedom from, like, if you've never been addicted to something, you don't understand. And so that, but they say just being an American, we're addicted to at least three things. I would think caffeine could be one. I would think food could be one. So you could get a little picture of it from those. But you see men that have hope and are recovering. And so it's just, it's awe-inspiring. It reminds you that God is real, God is working, and then just like how countercultural it is to show up and do hard work every week and be honest.
Right, yeah.
And it's just you just see God there, and it gives me hope for those men. Some are single, and we're just like, wow, this is awesome. You don't even want to bring this into your marriage. You want to get recovered before. Yeah. And then many mostly are married, and it's just like, you're trying to keep together, the family that God created and not let Satan break it apart, and then have fallout with the kids and all that kind of stuff. So it's powerful. It feels like frontline stuff. Yeah. And it's just like, sometimes it's hard to meet every week, but I'm like, when we see what's happening, it's not. It's just it's real stuff.
Yeah,
real good.
That's powerful. Janelle, how about you?
I think I would want to celebrate the courage of women who had every excuse to leave, every biblical reasons, cultural reasons, every reason to walk away, and who've stayed, because they trusted that God would defend them, that God would look out for them, that he would care for them. And that doesn't mean that you're supposed to stay in every situation. There are situations where the healthiest boundary is to separate, but not give up. They haven't given up. And even if their relationship is gone, even if they have no hope or very little hope, I should say, of seeing that relationship restored, they're still seeking to honor God as they process through the pain and they process through their betrayal. And they really don't want to allow the enemy to get any kind of foothold from this. And so they're willing to look at themselves. They're willing to look at God's word. They're willing to hold on to promises. They're willing to fight, to forgive. And then the best ones are the ones who are like, how do I help other women? How do I jump in and lead a group? And I know we've had that with the guys too, where it's like I remember JT saying at some point, I'm going to lead this group because I told God when I was in this, if I ever find a way out, I will tell everyone that I can. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's great, honey. You do that. And then there was a time where God was like, no, I'm going to need you. This is your story too, and I need for you to tell it. And so whenever somebody's willing to tell their story, to take that risk, I think it's
you always
pretty
got to honor
powerful.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lance, any final thoughts from you here as we begin to bring this to a close?
No, I just think that I think that the tide is very much turned. Like, for example, we just got back from Hume Lake, and the first night that's talked about, it's always talked about with kids. Every time.
Yeah.
That's the first topic they hit. And so, and every boys group, every men's group, it's always being talked about now. And so I think that the tide is shifting. I don't think all the communication is always healthy. So that's why I'm really kind of thankful for the work that you two are doing to create understanding. That I don't think that's always the case.
Yeah.
But I think at least the subject is being broached. Places like Pure Desire and Conquer Series and the Pillars and the women's group, these are taking it to a new level of health that I think is really powerful.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think it's important, just kind of my last thought as we wrap, is that I think there's a message that's important for those who don't struggle, especially those who have a loved one who does, and then also for those who do, that number one, for those who don't, to recognize it is easiest to judge most harshly sins that we don't struggle with.
Right. Yeah.
So
sure.
it is so easy to go, oh, that's gross. How could you? If it's not something that you struggle with. And I do the same thing. I admit it. I'm conscious of it, and I have to be aware of that. Right. And as it pertains to different issues that are not mine. Right.
Right.
So to recognize, no, we need to have empathy for one another, not that even if this is not your issue and you're bothered by it, that empathy is the first step. Each one of us is struggling, and we need to have empathy. And then for those that are, to recognize there is a way out of shame. And man, I think that's such a powerful resource our faith gives us in so many ways, not just for issues of sexual wholeness, but all over the place, that there's a way out of shame, and the church certainly does not need to be a place where you feel shame. So, and you guys have seen when people realize that, powerful stuff happens.
Yes.
So thank you to the two of you both for coming on, for sharing your story, for your courage, for your leadership, for the way that you are. I mean, to look at what God has done with your faithfulness in being willing to share your story, being willing to take your story and to use it to bring healing to others, it's inspiring. It's powerful. So thank you to the two of you for being part of the episode today. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lance, as always, for being a part of it as well. Thank you to all of you for listening. Really appreciate you being a part of this. Wanted to remind you one last time, ladies, B&B at bridgewaychristian.org. Gentlemen, Pure Desire at bridgewaychristian.org. There are resources here for you, and we'd love to come alongside you and be of help to you if that would be of benefit to you. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for another episode of Engaging Culture.
Thank you for listening to Engaging Culture, a podcast by Bridgeway Christian Church. If you enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. Thank you so much for listening. Music is used under the Creative Commons license and is provided by Dexter Britton.